We like to tell ourselves that the days of the government gunning down citizens in the street without a trial or a judge are buried in the 1800s. We think of the frontier as a place from history books where raw power didn't have to answer to a courtroom long before we built the systems meant to protect us today. But then you hear about Renée Good. She was a 37-year-old mother living in Minneapolis. On an ordinary Wednesday morning in early 2026, she was simply driving through her neighborhood. She wasn't a fugitive. She was just a person who happened to stop her car in the middle of a street at the exact moment a tactical machine was moving through her world. In a single heartbeat, 2026 started looking a lot like 1826. Because what was about to happen on that street wasn't about modern police work. It was about a tactical machine swarming a mother in her car. Suddenly, Renée's vehicle was surrounded by federal agents from Operation Metro Surge. One agent actually reached through her open window, screaming at her to get out. You can only imagine the absolute panic of being trapped in that seat. Renée tried to pull away. She briefly reversed, then started to turn her car forward to move into the flow of traffic. The ICE agent, his name is Jonathan, he was standing several feet away from the front of the car, and while she was pulling away, he raised his weapon and shot her 3 times, right through her driver's side window. I can believe this happened, but when I actually stop and think about it, it's sickening. And just like that, her life was erased by this federal bullet. Personally, I felt like these injustices ended like 2 centuries ago. But Renée Good is the proof that it still happens today. Back in the 1800s, when a life was erased on the frontier, the dust usually just settled. There weren't any cell phone cameras, no instant news updates, and honestly, usually no one left to even say the person's name. We like to tell ourselves that 2026 is a much more enlightened time, but the people in Minneapolis weren't so sure. Within hours of those 3 shots, they reacted like a society that realized its civilized progress was really just a thin coat of paint. They started building a memorial for Renée right on the spot where she was killed. But when the city crews showed up to tear down the barriers, it was like a match hitting dry wood. By late January, we weren't just looking at a local protest. We're talking about massive crowds, somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 people, filling the streets of Minneapolis alone. And the movement didn't stop at the city limits. It bled into at least 25 different states. You had high school kids in Texas, Washington, and New Orleans walking out of class just to make sure Renée's story couldn't be ignored. The anger only grew after January 24th, when federal agents shot and killed a VA nurse named Alex Pretti, which brought thousands more into the streets for national vigils. Then, on January 30th, things hit a breaking point with what they called the national shutdown. This was a total economic blackout. No work, no shopping, and no school. Designed to force the system to stop and look at what it had done. Even Bruce Springsteen stood up at the First Avenue Club, performing a tribute called Streets of Minneapolis. It's one thing to hear a politician talk about safety, but to see an entire country stop what they're doing to shout a mother's name. It's powerful. So, how does a routine neighborhood street in a modern city suddenly turn into a scene from a history book? Renée didn't just run into a rogue officer. She ran into a massive, federally funded machine that was moving through Minneapolis like a 19th century cavalry. Think about the scale of this for a second. The government sent 2,000 federal agents into a single city all at once. That was the reality of Operation Metro Surge, which was designed to be the largest immigration enforcement operation this country has ever seen. That's where someone like Kristi Noem comes into the picture. She was the Secretary of Homeland Security and the public face of this on-offense strategy. On January 8th, just one day after Renée was killed, Noem was at a press conference at the One World Trade Center. While families in Minneapolis were still reeling from those 3 shots, she was telling the world that the administration was using every single tool they had to protect Americans. It's chilling to realize that the tools she was bragging about were the same ones being fired through a driver's side window at an unarmed mother. Then you have the man who actually pulled the trigger, Jonathan. As it turns out, he wasn't exactly a stranger to these high-stakes traffic stops. Investigative reports later found that he had been dragged and injured by a driver during a different traffic stop just months earlier. I find it hard to wrap my head around the fact that the system saw that history and still kept him in the middle of a mission that treated a quiet neighborhood like a war zone. When you combine an officer's personal trauma with a federal mandate to stay on offense, you don't get safety. You get a frontier-style injustice that belongs in another century. In the 1800s, if the state decided you were the problem on the frontier, that was usually the end of it. You became a name on a headstone, and the power that put you there never had to answer for a thing. We like to tell ourselves that 2026 is different because we have all this oversight and program integrity. But then you look at what happened after the shooting. Instead of looking for justice, federal officials started trading blame. They actually tried to claim that the shooting was Renée's fault. To me, that's the final act of institutional betrayal. Not just taking a life, but trying to erase the victim's dignity to protect the machine. And for a while, it felt like the system was just going to wait for the noise to die down. Until March 25th, 2026. That's when the state of Minnesota finally stood up and kicked off a massive legal battle against the federal government to hold those shooters accountable. It took months of pressure, but just yesterday, July 14th, the administration finally hit the brakes and ordered ICE to suspend these vehicle stops nationwide. So, she finally got a reaction, but it still couldn't bring her back. We like to think the frontier justice of the 1800s ended 2 centuries ago, but as long as a routine drive through your own neighborhood can end with federal bullets and a victim-blaming report, those days are still very much alive on our streets.